It's a sad day to be a fan of the Destiny franchise. What am I talking about? Well, if you haven't heard already, in the past week, Bungie have made some huge layoffs and have delayed their 2 upcoming releases. But what does this mean for Bungie and the Destiny franchise as a whole? We'll grab some popcorn as we have a little look. The first thing that I heard regarding this situation was that Destiny 2's final DLC, The Final Shape, had been delayed. And at this point, I was thinking, well, it's annoying, but maybe this is a good thing because it will allow them to have some extra months to keep working on the game. Especially if we look at the controversial release of Lightfall, which was basically just a filler DLC to get us ready for The Final Shape. It was received poorly by the community, as everyone knew it was there to keep us ticking over until next year, where the big DLC would finally release. So yeah, my first thought was, they're taking these extra few months to make sure The Final Shape isn't received as poorly as a DLC such as Lightfall. This would also explain why the upcoming game Marathon was also delayed. We haven't really seen much in the game anyway, so I was surprised to see it coming out as early as next year. But for it to be delayed till 2025, allowed Bungie to make some improvements to The Final Shape, and then also have enough time over the next year to work on their big title, which is Marathon. But it wasn't long after this where I found out the true nature of what had happened, and probably the real reason for all these delays. And that's what I mentioned in the intro, the huge layoffs that have taken place at Bungie over the last week. From what I've read and heard from members of the Destiny community, it really isn't good, with staff ranging throughout the entire Bungie team being released. I'm not quite sure what's happened over the last year, but this has completely gone against what Sony said would happen when they took over Bungie about a year ago. I mean, this really does look bad from all perspectives. Ever since Destiny 2 has come out, it's been a troubled game. Firstly, when it was under control of Activision, we saw a very turbulent first couple of years for Destiny 2. And once it finally started to pick up, it seems like no matter what, it's always had its issues and controversies that it just can't escape. I mean, even before this whole incident happened, I mentioned earlier that the Lightfall DLC was really poorly received, and a player like myself, I didn't want to buy the DLC, I still haven't bought the DLC, and I can tell it's filler. It was meant to be this expansive DLC that was all together. Lightfall and The Final Shape were one at some point, but they knew it wouldn't be all ready in time, or they just wanted to release 2 DLCs and make more money. Either way, they split them up, Lightfall released, and now we would have The Final Shape as the final DLC. And it's very clear now that Lightfall and Destiny as a whole hasn't been performing as Sony would have liked. When Sony bought Bungie, it was clear they had big things in mind. With a reported fee of almost $4 billion, you need your flagship titles and products to be succeeding, and it's clear Destiny 2 wasn't providing that. So that's where we come back to this idea of the layoffs happening. I can't really understand why it's happened. I'm guessing they're cutting costs to end up turning a profit, but I just can't see how this will be successful in the long term, especially with a massive DLC around the corner, which people up to this point were still very excited about. This means now for the next 7-8 months before the release of The Final Shape, they've got less people working on it and a smaller overall team, so it's going to be really hard to balance working on The Final Shape and working on Marathon. And surely this is going to have a huge impact on both games. It would have been nice to see a game like Destiny 2, and maybe the Destiny franchise as a whole, as we really could be approaching the end of the franchise, go out with a bang. But instead, all signs are pointing to us going out with a whimper. I mean, I can't predict what's going to end up happening with The Final Shape, but if we take other similar examples, where small development teams are expected to meet huge goals, it usually doesn't meet expectations from the fans. Whether that's having a lack of content, whether that's having stuff on a smaller scale than we expected, or probably the thing that I'm most worried about when it comes to The Final Shape is that they end in a sort of rushed way, and that this small team sort of has to put together this ending just to be able to get the product out in time. I really do hope that a smaller team can pull something together and put something out in The Final Shape that will sort of revive Destiny and allow it to succeed again. But it's fair to say, the more and more we hear about these layoffs and the worrying future of Bungie as a company, the more skeptical I become about this franchise. So let's take one final step back for a minute. Let's look at the wider picture. Let's look at what it means for now up until The Final Shape, and then what it looks like after that. Well, I can certainly say, from now until The Final Shape comes out, it's going to be a rough journey. We're pretty much going into about a 7th month season for Destiny. The seasons in Destiny 2 for me already drag out quite a lot, so this is going to be quite an excruciating content drought. Probably something akin to the ones we used to see back in Destiny 1. And then once we finally get to summer next year, when The Final Shape is finally set to be released, I think either way, whether it's good, bad, or average, I think we do see the end of Destiny as a whole. At least for the time being. I can see them pausing the franchise maybe coming back to it in future. I mean, this whole Light and Dark saga has really been going on for the past 10 years. And there probably are ways that they can expand the lore, but I think for right now this is probably a good time to end. It's just whether they can end in that successful way. And finally, we look towards 2025, when Marathon is set to be released. Personally, I can potentially even see it be delayed to the end of 2025 or even 2026. I mean, just being a game by Bungie alone, it has huge potential. Halo obviously was a huge success. Destiny's been a success for the last 10 years, even if it has tailed off recently. And once the marketing starts to kick in, I think the gaming community will become excited for Marathon. But I think the most important thing, the most important takeaway from this whole situation is that it's a very uncertain future ahead. And that's the hardest part to take about all of it, because no one likes uncertainty. It's an uncertain time for us as players, and it's an uncertain time for the devs. We as players have no real idea of how this next year is going to play out for Destiny, and we have even less of an idea of what's going to happen to future Bungie releases. And it's a really sad time within Bungie, and I'm sure a lot of workers have seen their friends within the company be let go, and they could be wondering whether they'll be let go in future as well. They've also got the pressure of having to carry this DLC forward, having to carry this franchise forward, and having to carry Marathon forward into the future. And that is a lot to ask for this smaller team. So yeah, as I said in the intro, it really is a sad day to be a Destiny fan. But now I want to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comments below what you think about Destiny, what you think about the final shape, and what you think about Marathon. Do you think Bungie was right to lay off this many workers? And do you think any of these games can be a success going forward?